The staff sergeant's name was Brannick, and he had opinions about everything. He had opinions about gear, about tactics, about the correct way to approach a breach, about which MRE variety was least offensive, and, most relevant to the current situation, about women in Ranger units. His opinions on the last subject were not quiet opinions. He shared them with the completeness of a man who considered his opinions to be facts that other people simply hadn't encountered yet. She had been attached to the 75th Ranger Regiment's 2nd Battalion for 6 days, when Brannick decided to share his opinions with her directly. They were in the compound at Kandahar airfield, in the equipment bay, doing a pre-mission gear check on a rotation that was supposed to go out in 4 hours. She was checking her ruck, 68 pounds, built for a 12-hour movement in terrain that was going to include elevation because the target location was above 7,000 feet, and everyone on this rotation was going to feel it. Brannick walked past, glanced at her ruck, and stopped. "That's not going to work," he said. She looked up. "The weight distribution," he said. "You've got too much up top. You'll be off balance on the climb." She looked at the ruck. It was packed exactly the way she had been packing rucks for this type of movement for 8 years. It was correct. The weight distribution was correct for the terrain profile. "I appreciate the input," she said, in the tone of someone who does not appreciate the input but is choosing not to engage. Brannick was not deterred. He looked at her kit, at her briefly. "How much you weigh?" he said. She told him. He shook his head. He did not say anything for a moment, the way people do when they want what they're about to say to land with more weight. "Listen," he said. "I'm going to say something, and I need you to not take it personally. This rotation is going to be rough. The terrain, the altitude, the distance we're covering. I've been on 3 Kandahar rotations, and I know what it costs." He paused. "You're 142 pounds, carrying 68 pounds of gear. That's almost half your body weight. I've seen people your size blow out knees on this terrain and become a liability to the entire element." She looked at him steadily. "Have you done your gear check, Staff Sergeant?" she said. "That's not an answer to what I said." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." She picked up her ruck and shouldered it in one motion. "I'll be ready at the movement window," she said. "You should be too." She left the equipment bay. Brannick watched her go with the expression of a man who has just been dismissed in a way he does not have a rebuttal for, but is not yet ready to accept. The movement to the target compound started at 0130. 7 Rangers, plus her. She was attached as an intelligence asset. Her specific skill set was not in the mission brief because her specific skill set was in a part of the mission brief that only 3 of the 7 Rangers on this rotation had clearance to read. The terrain was exactly what she had expected. 40 degrees on the incline sections, loose shale, altitude sickness pressure, building at 6,000 feet for those who hadn't had time to acclimatize. The darkness was complete. No moon, thermal only. She moved in 3rd position, behind the point man, and the 2nd element, maintaining spacing and reading the ground ahead. Her knees were fine. Her weight distribution was correct. By mile 4, she was breathing harder than at sea level, but still within operational parameters. She had trained at altitude before. She had trained in conditions significantly worse than this. The body remembers altitude in a specific way. Not perfectly, but enough. Brannick was behind her. She could not see him, but she could hear his breathing. At mile 5, his breathing had a quality to it that she noted and filed. He was managing. That was the word for it. He was not struggling, but he was managing where some of the others were moving with more ease. She noted it without judgment. It was data. The contact happened at 0411, 300 meters from the target compound, in a wadi that the mission brief had designated as clear. The brief was wrong. 3 shooters, elevated position, firing from the north side of the wadi. The point man went down, hit in the leg, not fatal, but out of the fight. The second element took cover behind a rock feature and returned fire. She dropped to a covered position and assessed the geometry. The shooters were in a position that made direct return fire from the current element disposition ineffective. The angle was wrong. They needed either to break contact and flank left, which was 200 meters of open ground, or put someone in the alternate position that would give the right angle, which required moving through a 40-meter gap in the rock cover that was currently in the shooter's field of fire. This was the calculation. She made it in approximately 4 seconds. Then she moved. The 40-meter gap in the rock cover was not 40 meters of being shot at. It was 40 meters of moving fast enough and in the right pattern that the shooters couldn't track her effectively. She had been trained in a specific movement technique for exactly this category of situation. The technique was not about being fast in a straight line. It was about being unpredictable in direction and timing while maintaining forward progress. It was about reading the environment as you moved through it. The micro features, the shadows, the brief gaps in the line of fire. She moved through the 40 meters. She was not hit. She got to the alternate position, a rock outcropping that gave her the correct angle, and she came up firing. The firefight was over in 93 seconds. She was not counting. She found out the time afterward from the mission debrief recording. After the contact, the element reoriented. The point man, Gaza, she had learned his name on day 2, was down but mobile if assisted. The second element had Corporal Whelan, who had taken a fragment in the left arm from a ricochet. Not mission-ending, but painful and bleeding. Brannick was on the radio calling in the contact report. His voice was professional and precise. She noted this with the same neutrality she noted everything. He was good at his job, and the opinion he had about her was wrong, and those two things could exist simultaneously. They pushed to the target compound with a modified element disposition. She took the second position on the breach team because Gaza was now being assisted by the rearmost element member. The compound breach was clean. Inside the compound, they found what the mission brief had said they would find, and several things the mission brief had not said they would find, including a second communications cache that was not in the pre-mission imagery, and a set of documents in a script she could read. She photographed everything. Then she photographed it again. She was on the third set of photographs, working through a filing cabinet that the Rangers had cleared but not processed. When Brannick came and stood next to her, "You moved through that gap," he said. She did not look up from the documents. "Yes." "The 40-meter gap, under fire." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "I've got 12 Rangers who've trained this rotation, and 3 of them would not have moved through that gap." She looked up at him now. "They would have found another way," she said. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe not. The other way was 200 meters of open ground." She went back to the documents. "The gap was the better option, given the timing and the geometry," she said. "Anyone running the numbers would have gotten the same result." Not everyone can move like that. She photographed another document. Then they train until they can, she said. He was quiet. He watched her work for a moment. Then he went back to his element. The way back was when it got hard. Gaza was mobile but slow. The elevation was working on everyone by now. 5 hours in, altitude, contact stress, the specific kind of tired that comes from sustained adrenaline processing. Wayland's arm had been field-dressed but was compromising his carry capacity. At mile 6 of the return movement, Pranic went down. Not shot, not injured. His body decided it was done. He had been managing since mile 5 on the way in, and 9 miles of altitude movement and a firefight, and the weight of the mission had compounded on him. He sat down on the shale and looked at his legs and said quietly, "I need 2 minutes." 2 minutes was not available. They were in the middle of the return route with a specific timing window for the extract. They had 23 minutes to cover 4 miles at altitude. She came and stood next to him. "Brannick," she said. He looked up. "Get your ruck off," she said. "I'm fine." "Get your ruck off." He looked at her for a moment. Something in the way she said it. Not loud, not impatient, just completely clear about what was happening, got through to him. He got the ruck off. She picked it up. She added it to her own ruck, adjusting the carry configuration. 136 pounds. "On your feet," she said. "I've got the weight. You set the pace." He stood up. He was unsteady for a second, and then he was not. "The others," he said. "I'm aware of the others," she said. "Gaza is being assisted. Whelan is functional. Move." They moved. The adjustment she made to the carry configuration was not random. She had thought about this problem. The problem of carrying 2 rucks simultaneously. During a training evolution 18 months earlier, that had required exactly this. Not in Kandahar. Somewhere else in a different terrain type with different stakes. But the physics were the same. 2 rucks loaded differently require the weight to be redistributed, so neither system fights the other. You get the heavier load on the hip belt. You get the secondary load sitting higher and forward. You manage the center of gravity so that the system moves with you instead of against you. She had solved this problem before. She solved it again in 40 seconds on a mountain in Kandahar at the beginning of a 4-mile movement. Then she moved. 4 miles at altitude carrying 2 rucks is not a pleasant experience. She was aware of this. She was also aware that the alternative, missing the extract window, was significantly more unpleasant. The body has reserves that the mind is reluctant to access. She knew where hers were. She had been to them before, in other places, other nights, other terrain. She went there. She focused on the movement, not on the weight, not on the distance, on the next 3 steps, the 3 after that. Reading the terrain, maintaining spacing, tracking the element space. Brannick moved in front of her. He moved with the slightly unsteady but forward quality of a man who is running on will rather than capacity. He did not look back at her. She was fine with that. At mile 3, her left shoulder was in specific pain from the ruck configuration. She adjusted once, a small shift in position, and it returned to manageable. At mile 3.5, the altitude pressure behind her eyes increased. She breathed through it. Mile 4. The extract LZ. The bird was already inbound. She could hear it. The specific sound of an MH-60 rotors cutting through dark air, arriving from the south. She set both rucks down. She rolled her shoulders once. The element consolidated at the LZ. The bird landed. They loaded. The debrief started at 0800. She was in the back of the room with the portion of the element that was cleared for the full debrief. The documents she had photographed were being processed. The communications cache she had identified was being translated. She had showered and changed and consumed approximately 4,000 calories since the MH60 put down. The body requires this after a night like that one. Not rest exactly. Her mind was still running the mission, still notating the things that had worked and the things that could have worked better. But the fuel intake was not optional. You could run a body at deficit for short periods. You could not do it indefinitely. And the indefinitely was coming. 11 days, next rotation, next movement, next 40 meters of ground that might need to be crossed fast. Brannick was at the front of the room for the operational portion. He ran through the contact report, the breach, the compound clearance, the return movement. His account was accurate and professional. He did not editorialize. He did not mention her by name in the section about the contact. He used her designator, the one that corresponded to her clearance level. But when he got to the return movement, he paused. He looked at the room. He looked at the battalion commander, who was seated at the briefing table. "I want to note for the record," he said, "that I was temporarily compromised at mile 6 of the return movement. A member of the attached element assumed additional load, approximately 68 additional pounds, and carried that load for the final 4 miles to the extract LZ. I would not have made the extract window without that assistance." The room was quiet. The same member, Brannick said, was responsible for the flanking movement through the 40-meter gap during the initial contact. I believe that movement was directly responsible for achieving fire superiority and enabling the continued mission. He paused again. "I made an assessment of that member prior to this rotation," he said. "The assessment was wrong. I want that on the record." He sat down. The battalion commander was a man named Colonel Estes, who had run 40 Ranger rotations in 11 years and had the specific quality of stillness that came from having absorbed a very large number of extraordinary situations and no longer being surprised by any of them. He looked at the summary of her documented contributions to the mission. He read the photography log. 112 classified documents photographed in a 17-minute compound clearance. He read the contact report. He read Brannick's note about the return movement. Then he looked across the room at her and said, "Come see me after the debrief closes." She came to see him. He did not make a speech. He was not a speech man. "What's your next assignment?" he said. She told him. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he said, "I'm going to make a phone call. Not about the mission. The mission is classified at a level that puts it outside what I can discuss. About you, about your capabilities, about the fact that someone with your capability should be visible to people who can put it to best use." She was quiet for a moment. "I appreciate it, sir," she said, "but I'm already visible to those people." He looked at her, understood, did not push. "Is there anything I can do for you?" he said. She thought about it. "No, sir," she said, "but thank you for asking." She left. Corporal Garza was in the medical bay, getting his leg treated when she came to check on him. He was 23 years old and had been in the Rangers for 2 years, and he had a quality that she had noticed on day 1. A genuine attentiveness, a way of watching situations that indicated he was processing them at a deeper level than his rank and experience would suggest. "How's the leg?" she said. "Going to be fine," he said. "Clean hit. Missed the bone," She nodded. She looked at his chart, not reading it in detail, just noting it was there. "You were the point man," she said. "Yeah." "When you went down, what did you do?" He looked at her, slightly confused by the question. "I called out the contact, got into the best cover I could reach, started return fire." "While you were hit?" "Reflex," he said. "You don't really process it in the moment. You just do what you trained for." She nodded again. "That's correct," she said. "That's exactly what that is." He looked at her. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes." "The 40-meter gap. Did you think about it? Like stop and calculate?" She considered the question honestly. 4 seconds, she said. It wasn't long. 4 seconds while people were shooting at you. "They were shooting at the element," she said. "Not specifically at me in that moment. I had a brief window." He absorbed this. "And you could see the window?" "I could see the geometry," she said. "Yes." Gaza was quiet for a moment. "I want to be able to see that," he said. "You will," she said, "if you keep doing the work." She said goodbye and left the medical bay. He found her in the equipment bay at 1600, cleaning her weapon. He came and sat on a bench nearby. He did not say anything for a while. She continued cleaning the weapon. "The weight distribution was correct," he said finally. She did not look up. "Yes." "On your ruck, the way you had it packed." I looked at it again. It was correct. She set down the cleaning rod. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "I want to understand something," he said. "Not about the ruck, about the return. You were carrying 136 pounds, at altitude, after a firefight and a compound breach, for 4 miles. "Yes," she said. "You're 142 pounds. "Yes." "How?" She picked up the cleaning rod again. She thought about how to answer this. She thought about 8 years of preparation, about a program that no longer officially existed, and a training cycle that had been the hardest thing she had done before the many things that came after it, that were the hardest things she had done. About the specific work of building a body and a capacity that looked impossible from outside, but was just the result of doing things nobody was watching long enough to require. "I've been carrying heavy weight for a long time," she said. "Your body adapts to what you consistently ask it to do." Brannick looked at her. He was not satisfied with that answer. It was true, but it was not complete, and he knew enough to know it was not complete. But he also knew enough to know that the complete answer was not available to him. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what I said before the rotation." She looked at him. "I know," she said. Were you?" "I was not surprised," she said. "I've been in this situation before, many times." He shook his head, not in denial, in the specific headshake of a man who is processing something about himself that is uncomfortable to process. "That shouldn't be the case," he said. "No," she agreed, "it shouldn't. But it is. And the way it stops being the case is people like you make a note in a debrief." She met his eyes. "So thank you for that." He was quiet. "You're welcome," he said. The documents she photographed in the compound were processed by a translation team over the following 72 hours. The contents were significant, not in the way that made headlines. Operational intelligence rarely made headlines, but in the way that mattered to the specific people who needed it, who used it to update a map of a network, to add 3 names and remove 2, to shift the targeting priority of an operation that had been ongoing for 4 months. The communications cache she had identified was even more useful. It contained 11 months of operational messaging, imperfectly encrypted, that the technical team was able to partially reconstruct. The reconstruction produced a targeting package of sufficient quality to run a direct action mission within 2 weeks. She had photographed all of this in 17 minutes of compound clearance while Brannick's team was completing their clearance tasks. She did not know at the time that the documents would produce what they produced. She had photographed them because she was thorough, because she had been trained to capture everything and let the exploitation teams determine what was significant, because the alternative, being selective in the field, was the kind of judgment call that lost critical intelligence. She had captured everything. The everything turned out to matter. The altitude at the target location was 7,200 feet. This was not extreme altitude. Serious high-altitude operations happened at 12, 15, 18,000 feet. But 7,000 feet in darkness, under load, after weeks at sea level, with the specific additional demands of a direct action mission, was enough to challenge a body that hadn't had time to acclimatize. She had been at altitude before, many times. Some of the times she could name, some she couldn't. The body acclimatizes, but more than that, the body learns a certain relationship with altitude discomfort. Learns that the discomfort is not a signal of danger, but a condition to move through. Learns that the pressure behind the eyes and the slight lightheadedness and the additional effort in each breath are temporary and manageable, and the task continues regardless. She had built that relationship over a long time. Brannick had too, mostly. But even acclimatized bodies hit their limit, and his limit, and the altitude of that night, and the weight and the miles had intersected at mile 6. Her limit was further, not because of any mystical quality, because of work, because of years, because of cumulative, repetitive, specific training in conditions that had built a capacity that looked, from outside, like it was not supposed to exist. It existed. She had carried it all the way to the extract LZ, both rucks. Colonel Estes made his phone call at 1800 on the day of the debrief. He called a number he had for a contact at a command whose structure he only partially understood, and he said, "I have someone attached to my element that I want to flag." The person on the other end said, "I know who you're calling about." Estes paused. She's already where she needs to be," the person said. "What you saw on this rotation is not an anomaly. It's representative." Estes was quiet for a moment. "The cargo she carried on the return movement," he said, 136 pounds, 4 miles at 7,000 feet. "I know. That's not normal." "No," the person said. "It's not. But it's not magic either. It's the result of a long time of work in environments you're not read in on." Estes thought about that. "Is she going to be okay?" he said. Not a tactical question, a human one. A brief pause. "She's doing what she's built for," the person said. "I think that's the best answer I can give you." Estes accepted that. He hung up. He looked out the window of his office at the Kandahar airfield. He thought about the debrief, about Brannick's note for the record. He thought about what it cost, in a person, to carry what she carried. Not the weight, the rest of it. He thought she was probably fine. He thought she was probably already onto the next thing. Corporal Whelan, with the fragment in his arm, was back on the training rotation within 10 days. He did not interact with her much during the 6 days she was attached. She was quiet, professional, not particularly social. He had formed no opinion of her in either direction. After the rotation, he formed an opinion. He had been in second element during the contact. He had been in a covered position, returning fire, when she moved through the 40-meter gap. He saw it. Not clearly. It was dark, thermal only, and he was focused on his own fire control tasks. But he saw the movement in thermal, and he tracked it, and he watched her reach the alternate position and come up firing. And he felt the weight of fire shift almost immediately. He thought about that for a long time. He thought about it as the kind of thing you get wrong when you're reading from the outside. He had not formed the opinion that Brannick had formed. He had simply not formed an opinion at all. He had not looked at the roster and made a judgment. He had just run the mission, and she had moved through that gap. And the gap had been the right call, and the mission had finished. He thought, sometimes that was the whole story. The mission finished because someone made the right call at the right time. That was all it ever was. She left Kandahar airfield on a C-17 2 days after the debrief. She had been attached for 6 days. 6 days that had included one mission, one contact, one compound clearance with a document cache, and one return movement carrying 2 rucks for 4 miles at altitude. She packed her gear with the same efficiency she always packed. Everything in its place. Nothing left behind. Nothing superfluous carried. She did not say elaborate goodbyes. She told Gaza she hoped his leg healed clean. She told the intelligence team, led, that the document log had been updated and was in the system. She stopped by the equipment bay to return the last piece of borrowed kit. Brannick was in the equipment bay when she came in. He stood up when he saw her. Not to attention. Just up, the way you stand when someone enters that you have a specific regard for, and you don't want to be sitting when they leave. Good rotation, he said. She set down the borrowed kit. Good element, she said. He extended his hand. She shook it. Next time someone tells me someone can't do this job, he said, I'm going to think about mile 6. She nodded. Good, she said. She picked up her ruck and left. The C-17 was wheels up at 06:30. She slept for 6 hours and woke up somewhere over the ocean, over a dark sea that looked like nothing from altitude. And she looked out the window and was already thinking about the next thing. Brannick ran his next pre-rotation assessment differently. He had done pre-rotation assessments the same way for 4 years. Observe the candidates, form an initial assessment, watch the first few days for confirmation or revision. This was not an unreasonable process. Most of the time it worked. He changed it. He stopped forming an initial assessment. Or rather, he kept noticing the initial assessment forming, the automatic judgment, the pattern recognition. But he no longer trusted it. He watched it arrive, and he set it aside, and he waited for the evidence. Evidence took longer, but it was more accurate. His next rotation had a ranger who looked on day 1 exactly like someone who was going to tap out by day 3. Brannick set aside the assessment. He watched. The ranger did not tap out. He was slow on the physical events, but precise in the intelligence work and calm under stress, and exactly the kind of person you want on your element when the situation has deteriorated past the plan. Brannick kept him. He thought about mile 6. He thought about what he would have missed if he had acted on the first assessment. He thought about the ruck she had been carrying and the way she had picked up his without showing him anything but practical efficiency, and what that said about how long she had been carrying things that looked too heavy from outside. He was a better element leader now. She had cost him nothing but the wrong opinion he'd been carrying for years. The debrief log from that rotation was filed in the standard archiving system. Brannick's note about the attached element members' contributions was there. In the specific professional language of operational reporting, without names, just designators, just actions, just the record of what happened and who did it and what the result was. The documents from the compound were logged separately in a system with a higher classification level. The targeting package that came from the communications cache was logged in a third system. The log and the documents and the targeting package were not connected in any single accessible file. The person who would need to connect them would need access to all three systems, and the reason to connect them was not obvious unless you already knew to look. She knew to look, not for this mission, for the pattern of how her presence in a specific place at a specific time produced specific intelligence that produced specific operational outcomes. She tracked this in the way that certain practitioners track the consequences of their work, not for credit, not for documentation, but for the feedback loop that told her whether she was pointed at the right things. The feedback from Kandahar was positive. She noted it and moved on. 3 men came home from that rotation who mightn't have. The point man, the corporal with the arm wound, and the staff sergeant who had said she was too weak. She did not think of it this way. She was not in the business of counting the things she had contributed to, because counting led to a kind of accounting that was not useful for the work. You did the work. The work was what it was. You moved to the next thing, but somewhere, in 3 different states, 3 families had a soldier come home who came home in part because of what she had done in the gap, and at the LZ, and in the compound with the camera, and on 4 miles of mountain terrain, carrying 136 pounds. They didn't know her name. They didn't know she existed. She didn't need them to. She was already somewhere else, doing the work, in the way she had always done it, completely and quietly, and without requiring anyone's opinion about whether she was capable. She was capable. She had been capable for a long time. The capability was not a gift. It was a construction built from repeated specific hard work over a period of time that was not romantic and was not dramatic, and looked from the inside like getting up the next day and doing the thing again. The gap she moved through at 0411 in the dark above Kandahar was 40 meters long. It took her 11 seconds to cross. Those 11 seconds were the result of 8 years of preparation, training cycles that had ended with her flat on her face, in mud, on sand, on concrete, in cold water, in heat that made the air itself feel like a weight. 8 years of building a body and a mind that could look at 40 meters of ground under fire and calculate a path and move through it without hesitation. 11 seconds. 8 years. That was how it worked. That was how it had always worked. The 3 men who came home did not need to understand this. Their families did not need to understand it. Nobody needed to understand it except the people who built programs to produce women like her, and the women who survived those programs and came out the other side with a capability that looked, from outside, like it was not supposed to exist. It existed. She carried it with her to the next assignment. The next rotation started in 11 days. She was already ready. The pre-mission brief for the Kandahar rotation ran 4 hours. She sat in the back of the planning room with the cleared personnel and absorbed every detail. Terrain elevations, target compound layout, pattern of life, guard rotation timing. The intelligence picture was incomplete. It was always incomplete because the intelligence picture is never finished, only useful. But what they had was sufficient. She asked 3 questions during the brief. All 3 were about things that were ambiguous in the imagery. The analyst running the brief answered 2 directly and said the third was an active collection requirement. She noted all 3. The third question, about a secondary structure visible at the eastern edge of the compound in imagery that was 12 hours old, was the question that mattered. She noted it because 12-hour-old imagery in an active area was enough time for a significant change in the layout. And if the secondary structure had occupants, the breach plan had a problem. She was right about the secondary structure. She was right because she had been looking at imagery of this type, in this region, for long enough that she knew what 12 hours could change. The pattern of life she had studied from the regional intelligence file told her that secondary structures in compounds of this type were used for specific purposes at specific times of day and night. She would check the secondary structure during compound clearance. She did. In the hour before the movement began, she went through her pre-mission routine. This was not a checklist in the conventional sense. It was a process she had refined over years of missions that were significantly more complex than this one and significantly simpler. And the process had been refined to the point where it took exactly as long as she needed it to take and produced exactly the state she needed to be in. Gear check, weapon check, communication check, water check, medical kit check. The documents, already photographed, already filed, but she confirmed the camera storage was clear and ready. The intelligence package committed to memory in the relevant sections. Then the stillness. 15 minutes, not rest. The operational stillness that blanked the forward and backward processing and left only the present and the task. Then the movement. She was ready when the element assembled at 0130. She was always ready. At mile 5 of the approach, the element was moving well. The terrain had leveled briefly from the steep initial incline, and the darkness was complete and comfortable for experienced operators working in thermal. She could see the landscape in the green-white of the thermal display. Rock features, shrub lines, the distant heat signature of the compound infrastructure still 3 miles out. She was tracking Brannick's breathing. She had been tracking it since mile 2. It had changed incrementally, not dramatically. He was professional enough to manage his breathing and not broadcast his difficulty, but the incremental change was there. By mile 5, the cycle was fractionally faster than optimal for this terrain and altitude. She noted it. She said nothing. This was judgment. There were moments when you intervene in a teammate's state, and moments when intervention is premature. Mile 5 was premature. He was managing. The question was whether he would still be managing at mile 8 or 9 or 10. She ran the calculation. The probability of continued management through the contact and the compound clearance and the return was positive but not high. She did not share this calculation with anyone. It was not useful to share. What was useful was to be ready to respond to the outcome. She was ready. When the contact happened at 0411, the element was exactly where the brief said they would be, and the enemy was not exactly where the brief said they would be. This was normal. The brief is built from imperfect information. The real world is built from the truth. The gap between them is where contact happens. She hit the deck and assessed. The first thing she assessed was the geometry. 3 shooters, elevated position, angle of fire, cover available, Cover versus concealment. She was behind concealment, not cover. She needed cover. The second thing she assessed was the time. The contact window was closing. Every second the firefight continued was a second the element was not advancing, and the compound clearance time was not running. The third thing she assessed was the 40-meter gap. The gap was the solution to the geometry. The geometry was the problem. The solution was available. 4 seconds. She moved. At the extract LZ, standing in the rotor wash of the MH60 with 2 rucks on her back and the element loading around her, Brannick said one thing to her. He leaned in close so she could hear it over the rotor noise. "You just carried 3 of my men home," he said. She looked at him. He held her gaze. He was not being dramatic. He was being precise, in the way military people are precise when they are saying something that matters. Gaza goes down in the Wadi without the suppression you provided. Whelan goes down on the return if the element base breaks. I go down at mile 6 if you don't carry the weight. She said nothing. 3 of my men, he said. I want to be clear that I understand that. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Get in the aircraft, Staff Sergeant." He got in the aircraft. She was last on. The MH60 lifted. Below them, the terrain of Kandahar province fell away. The dark rock and the dry valleys and the distant lights of the airfield. She looked at it once. Then she closed her eyes and let the noise of the rotors fill the space where thoughts were not needed. She was tired. That was fine. She had done what was needed. The terrain at Kandahar costs something from everyone who walks it. At 7,000 feet at night, under load, the body runs a deficit. It runs it even when you are well prepared and well trained, and you have been to altitude before. The deficit is real. It accumulates. She felt it. She was not immune. Her knees were correct. Brannick had been wrong about the knees, but her shoulders felt the weight of the second ruck from mile 6 onward, not in a way that prevented function, in a way that was present and would need to be addressed in the recovery period. She filed that under acceptable cost. The acceptable cost was the thing you were willing to pay for the mission to complete. She had calculated the acceptable cost before the movement began, in the pre-mission stillness. She had included the possibility of carrying additional weight. She had built that into the cost calculation. The calculation had been accurate. The terrain cost what she had budgeted. She paid it. She always paid what she had budgeted. She never budgeted more than she could pay. This was a discipline that took years to develop. The honest accounting of your own capacity, without the vanity that inflated it, and without the fear that deflated it. She knew what she could do. She did it. The MH60 flew west from Kandahar at low altitude, below the terrain features, following a route that was not on any civilian map. Inside, the element sat in the specific kind of silence that comes after a mission that has completed. Not comfortable silence, not yet. The post-mission decompression was still running, the adrenaline still metabolizing, the body still running the checklist that says everyone is present and functional. She did her own checklist. She counted the element. She checked Gaza's leg. He had field-dressed it properly and was sitting with it elevated, pale but coherent. She checked Whelan's arm. She noted Brannick, who was sitting with his eyes forward and his hands on his knees, expression neutral. Everyone was present and functional. She closed her eyes. 6 hours to Kandahar airfield. She slept for 5 of them. She was that kind of tired, the kind that is clean, earned, honest, the kind that comes from having done the work completely and spent completely, and now the body takes what it needs. She was already present somewhere in the next thing when she woke up. 10 years after the Kandahar rotation, Corporal Gaza, now a sergeant first class with 4 additional deployments and a Silver Star, was running his own unit's pre-deployment training. He told the story. He changed the details. He did not use her name. He described the contact, the gap, the compound clearance, the return movement, in the specific terms that were appropriate for the classification level of the audience. He told his soldiers what she had done in the 40 meters. He told them what she had done at mile 6. He told them what she had done in the 17 minutes inside the compound, systematically photographing every document in a cabinet while the compound clearance ran around her. He did not tell them who she was. He told them what she was. He said, she was prepared. She was prepared before we left the wire, and she was prepared before the pre-mission brief, and she was prepared when the contact happened, and she was prepared when Staff Sergeant Brannick needed the weight off his back. He said, preparation is not what you do the day before, it is what you do for years, and the years show up in the moment when the moment is real. His soldiers listened. He thought they understood. Some of them did. After Kandahar, Gaza started training heavier than required. Not compulsively. Not in the way of someone running from something. In the purposeful way of someone moving towards something. He added weight to his ruck. He added miles to his runs. He trained at altitude when training at altitude was not required. He built the thing that she had, the reserve that appeared when the standard ran out. He did not become her. That was not the point. He became a better version of himself, built on what he had seen, built on the understanding that the ceiling was not where he thought it was. He ran his first rotation as team leader 2 years after Kandahar. His element completed every mission in the window. Nobody went down. Nobody was left behind. He credited the extra work. He credited the things he had learned to look for, in the terrain, in his teammates, in the calculation of what was possible and what would cost what. He did not credit her by name, but he knew. And in the quiet moments after the missions that completed when they needed to complete, he thought about a woman moving through 40 meters of ground under fire, in darkness, in Kandahar, at 0411, with a calculation that took 4 seconds. He thought, that is what prepared looks like. He trained accordingly. He was better for it. He was better for having been in an element with someone who showed him where the ceiling was. And all 3 of his men came home, every rotation, every time. Brannick learned one more thing on that rotation, and he learned it in the debrief. And it was this. The documents she photographed in the compound were the documents that mattered. Not the ones in the target package. Not the ones they had gone there for. The ones in the filing cabinet she had worked through in the 17 minutes of compound clearance while his team was doing their tasks. The ones she had photographed because she had recognized, from a document set that she read faster than most people read their native language, that the filing cabinet was a secondary cache that had not been assessed in the imagery, but was, based on the physical characteristics of the lock and the positioning in the compound, likely to contain operational material. She had been right. She had been right because she knew what she was looking at. She knew what she was looking at because she had spent years learning to look at things like this, in environments like this, with exactly this kind of time pressure and exactly this kind of consequence. Brannick had assessed her by weight before the rotation. Weight. 142 pounds. What she was carrying in her head, The languages, the pattern recognition, the intelligence framework, the 8 years of operational experience in programs he had no clearance to access, had no weight on a scale. It was the most significant thing on the element. He had not seen it when he looked at her in the equipment bay. He saw it now. He saw it every time he thought about the debrief and the document cache and the targeting package that came from the communications cache she had identified, and the 3 men who came home because of what happened at the Gap and at mile 6 and in 17 minutes with the camera. He saw it. He didn't need her name in the debrief log. He didn't need to tell anyone else the story. He just needed to carry it himself in the specific way you carry things that have taught you something you needed to know, quietly and completely and without drama. He carried it. He was a better staff sergeant for carrying it, and 3 of his men were home. That was the thing that mattered. That was the whole story. 3 men home.